Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is David Deviney. I'm the Senior Curator and Acting Chief Curator here at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. The Art Gallery of Nova Scotia stands on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. As an institution, we support arts, culture, and education on this land. We aim for meaningful partnerships with all the peoples of this province as we continue to live and learn here in Shabuktuk. I'm here this evening to welcome you to tonight's Creative Minds program. Today we open the exhibition Arctic Amazon Networks of Global Indigeneity, which was organized and circulated by our friends at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery in Toronto. I'm delighted to welcome Lead Curator, and I'm going to introduce people left to right. Gerald McMaster, artist. I apologize, people have moved around here. Sonya Kelliher-Combs and Couzyn van Heuvelen, who all traveled to Halifax for the opening of this exhibition and talk this evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to have the three of you here with us this evening. I would also like to thank TD Bank Group, who are the presenting sponsor for Arctic Amazon here in Halifax. Additionally, I wish to acknowledge the significant and ongoing support of the Canada Council for the Arts and the province of Nova Scotia. I hope everybody will take the opportunity to spend time with this incredible show, get to know about the works in depth, both tonight and across the run of the exhibition through the fall. Now I'm pleased to introduce the person leading the conversation this evening, Dr. Gerald McMaster, Lead Curator for Arctic Amazon Networks of Global Indigeneity. Gerald is a curator, artist, author, and professor. He is Plains Cree from the Red Pheasant Cree Nation and a citizen of the Siksika Nation. He currently holds the Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Visual Culture and Curatorial Practice at OCAD University in Toronto, where he is also the Director of the Wapata Center for Indigenous Visual Knowledge. Widely published, his awards and recognitions include the 2001 ICOM Canada Prize for contributions to national and international museology, the 2005 National Aboriginal Achievement Award, Officer of the Order of Canada, an Honorary Doctor of Letters from the Emily Carr College of Art and Design in Vancouver, and the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. In 2022, he was awarded the Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts for his significant contributions to the broader discourse of arts and culture. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Gerald McMaster.
How kita Scott now it's a pleasure to be here to see all, to be in Mi'kma'ki territory. Once again, it's been a few years since I've been here and been welcomed each time I've been back. So thank you very much. We are, of course, overwhelmingly pleased with the reception that we've had here in Halifax with the community, both the people who attended the opening last evening and you all in the crowd tonight coming here. Thank you very much. I know, as we always say, you could have been elsewhere, but I'm very glad you're here tonight. Let me just say a few words about the exhibition, because this evening it opens to the public and some of you may have not had a chance to see it yet. But by way of introduction, before we get to our discussion this evening, the exhibition brings together two regions of the world that you wouldn't think would be two regions of the world you'd bring together for an exhibition, specifically Indigenous artists, contemporary artists. But this exhibition came about many years ago when we were thinking about how do artists collaborate? How do Indigenous peoples come together to think about common issues and ideas that affect them all? Because I think certainly in the Canadian context, over the last number of years, certainly with the release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report of about a dozen years ago or so, the Canadian public has been talking about these kinds of histories and knowledges that were not only erased from Indigenous minds, their culture, but the historical process has been erased from our our own memory as Canadians. So the stories of the survivors, as well as the historical stories of the events of the time have come back and has influenced our thinking to a great degree, and how Indigenous peoples are not only represented, but the kind of voice that they have in our institutions, even what voices they have in museums and galleries, and how they're represented, and just how is Indigenous art, which is indigenous to this country, Canada, the United States, all of the Americas. I guess questions are, why have we taken a second seat or a third seat, within that ladder of representation? So, when we think of those kind of issues today and how the world is quickly changing, the influence that Indigenous discourse has in Canada, we start to think about, well, what's the discourse like in other countries, whether it's our close neighbor to the south, or in the Northwest, Alaska, but further south, in Latin American countries, countries that we really never ever hear anything coming out of, unless it's a news story, but rarely are Indigenous peoples ever thought about or told in an international scale. So, thinking of these ideas, I think was really prompted us to start to think about what's happening with our neighbors to the south, because we frequently have connections with neighbors or friends and neighbors in other countries like Australia, right, and New Zealand. They're colonized countries, but they're English speaking. We don't have that same kind of connection to, as I said, Latin America, because they speak other languages. And I think that's the sad part of it, but that was one of the reasons I think that we thought about doing an exhibition like this, despite the difficulties of linguistic difficulties, right, across borders and boundaries. But there must be some other way that we can challenge those, break those borders down, those thinking, and bring people together. So it prompted us in 2019 to do just that, to bring curators, to bring artists, to bring thinkers, knowledge keepers, to a symposium in Toronto, in which we spent a weekend just collaborating both on stage and in performance. And we took people out to a local powwow, just, South Americans had never seen a powwow before, so they were really, really excited to see that. But all that weekend, I think what was told to me by many of the artists was not only how happy they were to meet one another, but to share in commonalities, commonalities of histories, right? And commonalities of so many things in their lives. And in fact, that's what, throughout the weekend, it was just that warmth, I think, that was going on. But at the same time, once the symposium over, it was the most difficult task of curators is to try to summarize what went on, right? What was really said at this symposium? What did the artists say? So we came away with the kind of themes that really generated this exhibition and the project. Land was a huge thing that was talked about because it really inspires Indigenous peoples. That's why they're Indigenous, because they're Indigenous to territories, and they speak about that. Their identities are based on the land. So ontologies, very difficult term, but ontologies, the idea of being and belonging to a particular land was another theme. Traditional knowledge. We realize in contemporary times we're often thinking of the future and looking at new technologies and forgetting about the past. Well, so many of the artists in this exhibition and the thinkers were really challenged by that idea. How do we recoup what has been erased from our memories? Well, we have to go back and talk to knowledge keepers, to elders, read lots of books, and just think about this idea. So traditional knowledge was another aspect that was traded that weekend, and how people thought about traditional knowledges. Another one, perhaps, which is more common to when we think of settler communities coming into Canada or into the Americas, was this notion of contact. What happens between us? Well, besides wars, besides making love to each other, creativity happens between us, materials are exchanged, ideas are exchanged. And so contact and contact zones was another theme that came out of that conference. And finally, which is the subtitle of this exhibition, Global Indigeneity, was one that came out. And I think that that's something that was really an important part of the thematic part of this exhibition. So that was the inspiration. 2019, we were just set to go in 2020 with the exhibition at the power plant, then COVID happened. So it was postponed for 2 years, and here we are in 2023, and doing this project. And the 2 years that we were postponed by the exhibition allowed us to do this book. Some of you may have seen it. It's in the bookstore. It's beautifully designed by a graphic designer whose name is Sébastien Aubin, who is about the only Indigenous graphic designer in Canada doing books in Canada today. So it's just an absolutely spectacular looking book that he wrote, or he designed. But the writers in the book include 12 Indigenous writers, 6 from the Arctic and 6 from the Amazon region, and then my co-curator and myself who wrote a lengthy text in the book. But let me say just one other thing too. The exhibition, when we think of the Arctic Amazon, the Arctic is not one particular community, right? It's not just the Canadian community that we think of today, that we're all familiar with, of course, with Nunavut and the Iñupiaq in the Western Arctic, but it's much wider than that. It's very inclusive of Alaska, and we'll get to Sonya in a moment, being from Alaska, but it also includes Greenland, which is now a state of Denmark. And then you have a lot of the Sami or Sapmi lands of Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Russia. So you have the Sami, who are considered indigenous and part of the Arctic. So there's that community is very, very large. Similarly, the Amazon. The Amazon is not just stuck in Brazil, but it borders on 9 different countries. So we managed to get artists and writers from each of those areas, of course, speaking Portuguese and Spanish. So again, the language of translation had to be overcome from those areas. So this evening, of course, we're so pleased that these 2 artists came. They came because they needed to install their work, and we needed them here. Very precious work, and could only be installed by them. I guess they could have been done by installation crews, but I think to lend them a hand, I think to teach the installation crews, I think it was very special works that came. So go see the exhibition. We've got 17 artists in the exhibition, from both areas. I wish I could take you all on a tour of the exhibition. I took the staff on a tour today, and it was great to revisit each of the works and to talk. And we could go on for many, many hours to talk about each work. But tonight, we, of course, we've got 2 great artists here who will talk specifically about the works in the exhibition. So before you go up, or if you've already been up, you'll get a chance, an opportunity to get a bit more of the stories, because fundamentally much of the work is about stories, which they've researched and drew upon those themes that I talked about, those 4 or 5 themes that they've talked about, and they will explicate their ideas here tonight. So let me introduce Sonya Kelliher-Combs, who is Iñupiaq Athabascan from the northern part of Alaska, currently living in Anchorage, Alaska. And I've known Sonya for many, many years, and I frequently ran into her in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I kept thinking, what are you doing here? You know, you're not a Pueblo, you know, or Navajo.
Those are my relatives, Gerald.
So it's nice to have her here and to work with her after many of these years. Next is Couzyn van Heuvelen, who grew up, born and raised in Iqaluit, which is in the Nunavut part of Canada, currently resides in Bowmanville, just western part of Toronto. And if you all would like to say happy birthday to him, it's his birthday today. And he's going to be a new father next month. It's all coming, it's all falling down on you, I know.
Almost too much excitement. I got so much going on, yeah.
I'm also surrounded by this amazing blanket. Some of you may have seen by your local great Jordan Bennett. I don't know, are you giving it to me? Is that tonight? Yeah. That's why I'm sitting so close. You raffling it off or what? So we will proceed then. So here is the images that we'll address tonight are from the exhibition, and here is their work side by side in the gallery. So we're going to start off with Sonya's work, which all you Canadians, of course, will have grown up in the northern hemisphere with snow, and we all grew up as kids, and your mom and dad, they didn't call you idiots, but nearly, because we've lost mittens, right? And so they had to sew their mittens together, and this is what this Sonya has titled this piece here, The Idiot Strings. Okay, so Sonya, despite the bit of humor I injected there, this is a very serious piece.
Yes.
So if you will talk about it, and I know you wanted to add more to this piece that was not in the exhibition.
Yeah, you betcha. And I think actually we will be adding more later on. But so Idiot Strings are a series that began, it's been probably 15, 17 years ago. I started doing some pieces as memorials to some uncles who had passed from, they had taken their own life. And what I wanted to do was just raise awareness and try to erase the shame that comes with suicide, because I was raised in a Catholic family. And so as years progressed, I mean, I've been doing this body of work, Idiot Strings, and Credible series, which is linked to this set of Idiot Strings now since 2007, when I did a solo show at the Anchorage Museum where I live currently. So Credible and Idiot Strings are tied together. Idiot Strings are the tethers that hold your mittens, and Credible is a series about the Catholic Church in our communities, specifically in Alaska, but we all know that many churches have been in many of our communities. And I think since early 2000, maybe 2010, there was a release of information, and I had been doing some research for quite a time. And this wonderful author, journalist came out with, he did a wonderful expose through ProPublica about the Catholic Church, and I was able to have access to this information about all these different priests and lay people who had been in our communities. And it was an overwhelmingly emotional experience to see all of these people who had been in and out of multiple communities, and over the period of 40 years, maybe longer than that, starting in the 1927, and the last date that I have is 1996. So these are the 35, these Idiot Strings represent the 35 villages that have credible claims. We all know there are many more claims that were not corroborated or whatever they say, but it's an ongoing series, and my family and many other families have been directly impacted by the church and other means of colonization. I've done a number of works about people like Sheldon Jackson, who was considered the father of modern education in Alaska, who was secretly sending away children from specific populations so that the Carlisle Indian School would have the right number of diversity. He wanted to have the most diverse Native school in the nation. So we have some terrible history that needs to be unearthed and brought to light, and that's what this work is about, as well as the other piece in the exhibition. So
We'll go to the next series here. Very tiny, tiny works, but beautifully installed, and each one very different from the other.
yeah, the thing I like about Small Secrets is it's something you can take along with you. I actually do like classes sometimes with youth and adults where we make small secrets. That's what this series is called. This is called Small Secrets, Red, White, and Blue. And I don't think I have to explain it that much. It's basically about our Indigenous population and our relationship with the United States government. And sometimes people I remember traveling abroad and I said I was from Alaska, and the guy's like, wait, you're American. And I just kind of paused for a minute, and he said, you're American, aren't you? Are you proud, aren't you proud to be American? And I said, my people were Alaskan way before they were American. So, but I've done many of these pieces. Some are pointed like these ones that have the American flag. Some are made from gut. Some are made from found bed sheets. Some are made from men's ties. There's all sorts of different ways of thinking about secrets. We all have them. Some of them are meant to be stored away, and some are meant to be brought to light. A lot of people have donated me hair now. Whenever you get a haircut, just think of me. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's hard stuff to talk about, but I feel like it's important,
This one, this is the shedding skin, and we have a close-up of it in a second, but it's very subtle. And what was interesting about this piece here is that it's put together with needle and thread. And what reminds me of the work of artists, particularly from the Arctic, is how important needle and thread was to survival. We wouldn't think about it. But it's the ability of women to be able to sew clothing that can survive in such extreme temperatures. The other thing I liked about it was the interconnectivity of all the thread to one another, and the fact that that skills, traditional knowledge, is passed from one generation to another, and in these instances, it's very tenuous because you could easily lose it. And which, when we talk about cultural erasure that happened over the last many decades ago, but the tenuousness of Indigenous cultures and all the knowledge. So, if you want to talk just a wee bit more, I'll get a close up. Here you go. You can.
Gosh, you could just do my whole thing, I think. I think the only thing you missed on that was so the idea of shedding skin is, we are all connected. We're all more similar than we are different. We share common DNA. And we come in all different shapes and sizes and colors. And I think of just some of my family, like my mom's sisters her mom died from TB, and she was the only one who stayed. She was adopted by her aunt and uncle, and then two brothers who were older were shipped off to live with family in another village. And then her two sisters, who were also older, moved to Missouri and stayed with some family in Missouri. And, that separation. And then she got a whole new family. She was young, she was a baby. But it took 46 years for her to meet her sister in Arizona when her and my dad retired there. They winter there. But like her sister looks just like her. Her other sister had passed away, but those ideas of the separation of family and, she was from a boarding school. She went to boarding school from the age of 4 at St. Pius Mission in Skagway, and then went to Mount Edgecombe after that. But there's just so many ways of separation, but somehow a lot of us come back. And that's this idea of like the thread being broken, but coming back and rejoining your family, or even the sense of community in rural Alaska, in particular, rural anywhere, and how it takes a while to fit in, but eventually you find your place and people surround you, and it doesn't matter what color you are, or where you're from. So we could move on to, I'm talking too much.
Many of the people probably in the audience would have very little knowledge of Alaska, as you were saying. It's far away. It's often assumed that's where so many indigenous peoples actually originated from, through Alaska and the land bridge across the Bering Strait, which is true and false, I guess. But Inuit, in general, when you think of Inuit who are in the east and in Greenland, came from that area of Western Alaska thousands of years ago and migrated across the Arctic. So could you just tell us a little bit more about Alaska and what we should know, and the indigenous peoples there, specifically with your people in Alaska, and what?
I can tell you that, I'm not an Iñupiaq speaker, but my father is with the Inuit Circumpolar Council. He's retired now. His wife is from Greenland. Like, they can all understand each other all the way across the circumpolar, even into Siberia. That the technology is very similar. When I go to places like Inuk, I'm like welcomed like a part of the family. And we even found out we might be related the last time we opened the show. I met his mom, and I found out like just across the way. And it's a long, I look just like him, don't you think? But, but seriously, I think that when I went to Denmark the first time, walking down the street in Copenhagen, everybody acknowledges each other. You see in their eyes, they're saying hello. They don't have to say anything, just with a little nod and acknowledgement in the eyes. I think that people who are open, they know that there's this connection, whether it be the city or in rural places, and our reverence for the land and each other, taking care of each other, is a universal value. At least that's how I feel.
Here's the thing I was thinking about as you were just talking. I come from the prairies of Canada, Saskatchewan, and our cultures went north and south, back and forth. And to the degree that today, because of that movement, migration back and forth every summer for powwows, we carry feathers, but there's laws against feathers in each country. Canada and the United States, there are laws. There are laws of migrating or bringing feathers from Latin America across the many borders and boundaries, right? And so indigenous peoples that is our culture, right? That we carry with us all the time, are confronted with the laws of the colonial laws, right? To continue life. And you and I talked about this, and if you could talk a little bit about that, because I know that you're confronted by the same thing about bringing certain materials across and then going the other way.
Absolutely. You notice there isn't any gut in the work that's here, and there's a reason for that. Any marine mammal product. Because to try to get through the CITES permitting and the Marine Mammal Protection Act is almost an act of God, in a way. If I bring it on my person, it's different than bringing it or shipping it for an exhibition. And sometimes I've actually brought it in my suitcase and installed it places and I know people who've driven across the border and hid it in their clothing, to be able to have an exhibition with those protected products. It's definitely an issue, and
So consequently, some of the works we wanted, we couldn't get for this show.
100%, exactly.
That was a problem.
Yeah.
That was
As Maureen Grubin, we brought her to the Anchorage Museum, and we couldn't get her work there, so I suggested that we just make life-size decals and talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And we did display that work in that exhibition, but it had this bullet point that said, this work can't be here in person because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. So I'm sure we'll get back to that in a few moments again. So let's move on to Couzyn. Many of you might not know, but he went to NASCAD, right, just next door. And I was told by one of the curators that he was looking at a particular set of palettes one day. Of course, palettes are all over the place. And as he looked at that, he was inspired and added a piece to the palette that became a sled or a komatik. I think I got the story straight.
Yeah.
And this is the piece in the exhibition, and there's so much to this particular piece. And I think I got a few images here. So, Couzyn, fill us in. What's going on this lonely komatik in the middle of an ice floe?
Sure. I'm tempted to go right to the start of the series with that first work, but then I don't think we would get very far in the conversation. But yeah, some of the first Hamutik pieces that I'd made were also palettes. Just, I don't want to spend too much time on it because that's not the particular work in the show, but thinking about a palette as a way that goods move around, and thinking about a Hamutik as doing the same thing. For Inuit, it's how we moved all of our belongings. All of our belongings would go on a Hamutik, and that's how we would travel with, everything that we would have owned. And I think also talking about the cross borders maybe is this piece is about migration, thinking about Inuit technologies and how we move through the world and how we move through the landscape. The Hamutik is, a piece of Inuit technology that comes from having to move about a particular landscape. And so thinking about, you were talking about, one of the themes was kind of the environment that we live in. And so, that comes up in a lot of different works, but for me, like the Arctic environment, the Hamutik plays a big role in being able to survive in that environment. I could jump into a lot of different threads. A lot of my work kind of comes from a lot of different modes of thinking that I'm trying to work through, and then so it all kind of comes into the piece in various ways. So I find myself, I can kind of chase a thread and get a little bit lost in one aspect. But
How about the construction of it, the material, and why you did it in the material you did?
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to talk about that. That's great. Thanks. So the material is soapstone. And so I think a lot of us are probably familiar with Inuit stone carving. A lot of that is done in soapstone, at least in the last, I'll say 70 years. There's a market for Inuit carving. A lot of that is soapstone. And so I'm thinking about the kind of artwork that we produce and the canon of Inuit art. And another thing a tool that I use often in my work is a shift in scale to either bring objects that I feel are culturally important. I can do the shift in scale where these small objects, when they're made size of your body, then it's clear that they're important. It makes you reconsider those objects. And I think I was looking at Inuit carvings and Inuit carvings of Hamutit and soapstone carved Hamutit, dog sleds. And and then thinking about my own work in that shift of scale, and then I wanted to explore bringing that miniaturization, that small soapstone hummutic back into a life-size version in those materials. And so maybe even part of it, just to see that object exist in the world, and to see, to learn what it might mean, or what it might change about my own thinking about the hummutic. So, yeah, the choice of soapstone is comes out of Inuit stone carving.
The other story is in the actual the design, the plinths, and
Yes.
all the little broken pieces that are part of the full design. And there's a story behind that, which I thought was quite interesting, which was kind of influenced this presentation. I think you were back home up in Iqaluit or somewhere, and you heard
Is it the
local radio story.
Oh, this is pretty close. It's the community Facebook group for my hometown of Iqaluit. It becomes kind of a place where people air their dirty laundry a lot, but it's also has some benefit to being able to kind of reach a lot of people. The community has grown a lot, and so from time to time you'll see a post where somebody has left their hummutic or their truck or their snow machine on the ice, because for most of the year that's a big open space, and it's, you can leave those things. Yeah, they're safe. But then thinking about this time of year when the ice is breaking up and the ice in the bay suddenly breaks up, it can happen really quick. So you'll see a kind of a panicked post maybe about like whose vehicle is this? Like they're going to lose it and say, oh, this is so and so's brother. Like I can get in contact with them, and people get tagged, and then hopefully, hopefully it's saved. Kind of a post that kind of goes viral for like its urgency, and it has some benefit, I think. But so there's a little bit of humor in that, in the kind of ice breaking up, and but again, thinking about the landscape in a particular time of year, and the chance that this work could be lost. You know what I mean? Like having an imagination about this particular piece when the ice is breaking up, that it could be, lost. I don't know. It could sink like a, right? Yeah. Yeah.
The installation here at the Archive of Nova Scotia is slightly different in what it originally was in Toronto. But what you'll see in this image here versus what's here at the gallery they're in the same space. And you talked about miniaturization, right? Lures are miniature, the size of this, this little thing here. And what you like to do in a lot of your work is to blow them up, to enlarge them, in which case we kind of, when you see something small at an enlarged scale, you get to appreciate sometimes the design from a macro to a much larger scale. And so there are several of these lures. I don't know what the Inuit name is for the lures, but you can see them. They were placed about 10 to 12 feet off the ground here. When you get into the exhibition, you'll be up really, really close to them. So could you talk about these lures that you've been working on for many years?
Yeah, I think you mentioned because you mentioned the palette hummutic, and then I'm a NASCAC grad, and so I'm thinking about the first lures that I did here, which were lure-sized, and kind of had some objects that were shrinking down. But since then, I've also gone the kind of other route where they're enlarged, because thinking about, let me pick a spot to start. thinking about the kind of artwork that Inuit do historically, a lot of those art objects have been either our clothing or hunting and fishing implements. Because there's a kind of economy to what objects we can take with us, and so thinking about everything has to be able to travel on a hummock or travel with us. You have a lot of these small objects, but then I think, those types of objects are still used present day, and I think in the past, it's clear that those are important objects because it's from a small selection of objects. You don't carry around things you don't need, but present day, a lure doesn't seem like an important object most of the time, but I certainly argue that they are important cultural objects for Inuit. Looking at our historical art production, but also present day fishing practices, and so even the kind of, an off-the-shelf spoon lure from the hardware store, that can have some meaning for Inuit, and there's a lot of, stories associated with catching fish, and there's a lot of, other practices that surround fishing or that fishing becomes a part of. But for a lot of this series, it's about kind of asking the audience to reconsider the importance of these types of objects. And, by blowing them up to the size of a person, it really does shift your relationship to that object. And so when we showed them at the power plant, kind of overhead, it puts you in the perspective of the fish, and then here they're kind of closer to the body, and so you kind of feel a relationship with them as being they're about the size of a body, and so they kind of have a different relationship. You relate to them in some way, and the series has also been a kind of vehicle to explore a lot of different materials and fabrication processes. And, I can explore historical examples of lures and lures that I've used in the past or that have been recommended to me. And then also kind of looking at imagined lures, things that could be stand-ins for lures or things that might represent the kind of lures we might use in the future, or objects that could kind of serve the same function. Mm-hmm. And I could talk about specific works. This lure on the left is based on a lure that would have been a style of lure that would have been carved out of usually a tooth. It has that kind of tooth shape. And so using the kind of materials that are available and making lures out of them. And then the lure on the right came out of a workshop that I attended that the Toronto Inuit Association put on. That was a drum making workshop, and so it was 2 weekends. And so I went the first weekend and started to drum, and then was thinking like, how do I make an artwork out of this? I was really like enamored with that process, but so I came back the next week with I stretched a frame that was the shape of a spoon lure and stretched a drum that at that scale, but is also at drum scale.
Sonya, we spoke briefly about the difficulties of Western and Indigenous cultures coming together, right? And often in kind of asymmetrical situations, and with the laws and whatnot. And so I wanted to get into the next piece actually, because fishing in the Arctic, right, is something that Inuit have come into contact with the West, as it were, right, with hunting and the laws for that are put in place that Inuit depends so much on the sea, but yet at the same time the laws that restrict access to the sea it's like the same way with Sami, that the laws are in place to restrict their access to the reindeer. So always these laws, right, restrict the access for Indigenous peoples because it's the livelihood. And this particular piece, though it really doesn't address that, I think in many ways it does. But talk about this piece here. This is a very interesting piece called Avatak, yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. An Avatak is traditionally one full sealskin that is inflated with air and then tied off onto a line and used along with a harpoon. And so you have harpoon tip attached to a line attached to an Avatak. And so it's a tool used in hunting. It allows you to track and tire the marine animal that you are hunting. And it's one full sealskin. And so this is a kind of, this is also a foil balloon, a party balloon, that is also an Avatak. Yeah, and I think the way this piece is kind of worked out is that those conversations about Inuit sealing and the conversations that I've got to have with people have been very different since they've been very different when this piece is involved, because if you'll get to see, if you haven't already, but there's a group of these upstairs, but they're very inviting, they're friendly, and they're fun. They're these shiny balloons, and so I think they kind of invite people to play with them. They're very animated, and so, you know, when people approach this work, they're already kind of excited about the work, and it's enticing. It's a party balloon. We understand that that's a type of celebratory object. We put them, you know, we'll use them at a birthday party or a celebration, you know, and I think about them as location markers as well. Like the Avatak is a location marker, and these types of balloons are also a location marker, but in this sense, they are a marker to bring you towards an event or a celebration. And so I really think about these as kind of a celebratory invitation to look at the Avatak and you know, by extension, Inuit sealing practices in the way that we look at them. You know, we celebrate hunting seal, and so I don't think the interactions that a lot of people have with Inuit, I don't think most often people aren't starting at that place. It's more, usually it's people who want to argue, or they have an opinion that they want to express to you. But, you know, through this work, I've found that people are ready to have a conversation in a different way about sealing. Yeah, I'm sure I've missed something.
Well, go ahead.
And
I was just going to say.
I think that's really beautiful. That's
Yes.
the way I think. I mean, it's like people never want to know. I shouldn't generalize, but it's so interesting. I think that we have this relationship with, you know, nature and our food, you know, the things that we harvest and the mutual respect. And like most people now, farm to table is so popular, right? And people have chickens in their yard or goats or whatever. And now people are beginning to have this relationship with the things that they consume. You know, they know where they come from, it's healthy and all of that. And it's just a different relationship with gathering and hunting and each other too at the same time. Because you can't, I mean, some people hunt seal alone, but not that many. You know, most of the time when we're harvesting, we're not by ourselves. We need our family. We need our community. Yeah. And it's a long process to get to the place where it comes to your table. So I think, you know, I love that idea of like the celebration is so beautiful. I mean, there's nothing like that.
Now, we're in a fishing community, Halifax, in the Maritimes, and the relations between Indigenous peoples and locals I think, has been long and sometimes confrontational. So it's an ongoing issue. But I think conversation is really a part of that, and I think that that's what is probably happening. And but the story, the Indigenous story, sometimes is just not heard, right? So I'm thinking here of Inuit who often have had to go to Europe to fight their case in the courts because so many of the organizations like PETA and others who are animal rights people who come and impose the kind of ideas with not knowing what the issues are here in Canada or perhaps even in Alaska, and just how that relationship of Indigenous peoples to the animals, to the seals, for example. You know, there is no overhunting of seals. There is a harvesting of seals. So I think to try and make that argument to organizations sometimes that just don't want to listen has been very difficult for Indigenous peoples, even though they sometimes are on the same side, you know? And I think that plays out in our lives every day. And I think, and so the exhibition to some degree talks about those contact zones that are every day, they're ongoing. You know, how do we live with one another? How do we work with one another? How do we be in the same communities together, right? And I think that's an important conversation. I know that goes on here. So, and I think it carries on certainly in the Arctic and in Alaska and many of the other territories that we've talked about, whether it's in Sapmi, you know, in those areas. So that brings us to a close, I believe. I think we're now running out of time. And let me add this one thing. We have one other image that I wanted to show you. This is a work by Merritt and Sarah. And it's a work that is in the Treaty Gallery, I believe, at the Art Gallery, of the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University, the Treaty Gallery. And this will be installed soon. I don't think it's there presently, but it's a work by Merritt and Sarah, who is from Norway. And she collaborated with a Peruvian artist, Cecilia Vacuna. And anybody who was at the Venice Biennale this past year will remember that she was honored for a kind of a Lifetime Achievement Award, I believe. And I've worked with Cecilia in the past many years ago. But they worked together on this piece. And so what they did was, it's called Gatke Kipu. Kipu is it's like a mnemonic device of strings, right? It's some of you may remember or have seen these very intricate looking strings. You have one that goes out this way and then all these strings that are attached to it, and they're knotted in different places. And so scholars, Indigenous people have been trying to interpret what these are because that knowledge has been forgotten. It's been erased, right? And so Vacuna has been working on these kipus for many, many years as an artistic practice. And so she met up with Merritt in an exhibition in Geneva and together worked on this piece as kipu. But so instead of strings, they're clothing. And the clothing is primarily of the Sami peoples, this bright blue and red clothing. And so together they collaborated, and it's a piece that hangs from the ceiling. So as a part of an interactive element to this exhibition, and it'll be on during the Indigenous Games, and I think there are people that have been asked to contribute some element of clothing to this piece, and they'll continue to create this from a distance here. So it'll be here throughout. Well, I'm not sure the actual timeline, the time frame of this exhibition, but it'll be on off-site. Okay, so we probably have a few minutes now for a question opportunity, and we have one in the front already. Yes, do we need a microphone? Or I can repeat your question. How's that?
I appreciated the lengthy discussion around fishing. And I think there's a lot of opportunity now to expand the understanding about fishing and what it means to Indigenous people in the context of sustainability and in the context of the interrelationship between environment and health, because it takes the story so much beyond, talking about the species and whether that's a good thing to be doing if you're killing the species. But at any rate, because with factory fishing, that's where most of us get our food from. So the kind of fishing that is still taking place in some parts of the world in Indigenous territory is so much more intelligent, and so a lot can be done to inform the understanding of the importance of getting back to some of those traditional methods. And so I would encourage you to explore both of the sustainability in general, and then the interrelationship between environment and health. You're not polluting the waters. You're out on the water, knowing what's happening with the water, witnessing with your own eyes the changes in the ocean, and being able to figure out, what to do about it instead of just going and doing factory fishing somewhere else. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that I also appreciate the richness of this art, and would like to compare that with experiences I've had looking for such kind of art in the Americas, the Southern Americas, in Brazil, Colombia, and Ecuador, and Mexico. And, if you go in the main galleries there, almost all of what you see is anger, certainly legitimized, but anger toward colonization and the so it's it's actually showing the war machinery and the whole effect of war on the people, and the traditional knowledge is not, you can't find it anywhere. It's very upsetting. So, with the travels that the three of you here do, if there's any way to make suggestions to improve that situation down in the Southern Americas, that would be a wonderful thing. Thank you.
I can address that last part, perhaps. Yes, we did. I did. In my travels to South America, I did see a lot of the kind of art that you're mentioning, and it's maybe it's a part of it is a wake-up call, I think, to the devastation that's being wrought on, that we hear in the news up here in North America, about the devastation to the different parts of the Amazon and just other parts of Central and South America. But at the same time, what we try to do here, as with these artists, it's what is the realities of your homeland? To some degree, many of them just say it's traditional ceremonies. It's our relation to the land, right? It's that understanding of who we are, because quite often the outside does not know who we are, and just their artistic practice as well. And I think that was really the gift that they gave to us, is to understand and allowed us into their communities through watching the ceremonies. I know a lot of folks here in North America have hidden that in a clandestine way because it was outlawed. And so we didn't allow outsiders. But what the Yanomami have done was allowed everybody to go in. I mean, we will never practice it ourselves, but as spectators, to appreciate how important ceremonies are to sustainability, not just the sustainability of the culture, but the relations to the land around them. I think that is critical. But that's also at the same time how should I say it? It's critical to their survival because it is always impacting them. When we were doing this show, COVID was the big thing that was affecting all of us throughout the universe, right? And so in particular, the people of the Amazon were really, really afraid because many of their elders were dying out, and our elders, certainly in North America, were affected the same way. But their communities are so much smaller that the effect was devastating. So when we look at their art, they're allowing us into kind of the ceremonial life, because that's the critical element of who they are and who we are as well, right? Ceremony is important. That's important for our survival. If we don't practice those, then that relation, the sustainability of our relation to the land, to the animals, is curtailed, is cut off. So anyhow, you may want to talk a bit more about that, Michelle.
I'm just going to tell you about the fish. Always request, and I mean, not just request, but demand like wild salmon. It's a simple thing, but instead of farm salmon and things that are genetically modified, so their life expectancy is 1 year instead of 3 years before you can eat them. All of us are carrying microplastics in our body now. So it's just a reality that our DNA is going to change, and it's a scary thing. So you just have to be aware, and you have to do your part. And some of my work, not the work in here, addresses those kinds of issues. It's real. I mean, that's why I think what he does is talking about harvesting and being able to have a relationship with what you consume is so important. And COVID, one good thing that came out of that was people began to think about where their food came from and didn't have to live in a fast food nation in such a way that we have been for 40 years, 50 years, whatever, however long it is. But it's not going to be solved in my lifetime, but it's a place just to move forward, to try to be better to the land and to each other.
We have time for one more question.
I was wondering if here in Mi'kma'ki we've learned about Nedugalimp and the philosophy of taking only what you need, and that philosophy also being tied into two-eyed seeing, where you understand the bringing together of science and also Indigenous knowledge. And I wondered if some of those philosophies that we've learned here are also shared in Saskatchewan, for instance, in the north, if those philosophies, I'm sure they're very similar, and they're, for me, very important for me to understand how to live and, how I've been raised as well. But I wondered if those philosophies are spoken of through cultural sharing, or if it's just something that you know as part of traditional knowledge and everyone understands it.
You bring up an interesting idea because it's a concept I just discovered. I'd heard it before, but it was explained to me last night by Ursula. But what's interesting is that how we develop concepts sometimes to be able to articulate things we've already known, but we just didn't have an Anglicism for it. Or, we've had traditional languages, such as in my Plains Cree language, it's Ganawapahtamawin, which means a condition, a way of seeing. And that way of seeing is based on our relation to the land. It's our relation to the animals, to everything around us, and how it is articulated and how we conceptualize what we see through language. So when we lose language, we lose those abilities to see with the two-eyed seeing, or a visual knowledge of our environment. And I think the artists are at the forefront of bringing us back to that point, of a way of seeing. Because we've heard so much about ways of knowing and how important the ways of knowing are in our life, but only now are we starting to talk about ways of seeing, and that's artists are the ones who have that ability, not they have the ability, but the creativity and the forethought to be able to articulate that idea. And so, so that's what I think they've been working on. This exhibition is all about this indigenous visual knowledge, if you will, that is similar to that idea of the two-eyed seeing, yes? And I don't know if you guys wanted to talk a bit more about that and that way of seeing that we're now, I think we're now thinking about and talking about. It's not just art school seeing, but it's an indigenous way of seeing, right?
Well, I always talk about how, when I grew up, and I'm sure it's the same with Couzyn, is like, nobody preached at us as a child. We just sat there and we watched. And that was a way of learning, by observation and trying. And there was no, like let's say my mom or my grandma gave me a piece of hide or something to learn how to do something, bead or stitch or, cut out a pattern, whatever it was. It wasn't about the object. It was about the time spent. And it's a completely different way of learning. It's not about the end result. It's about how you got there. And I always think about that whenever I'm doing anything. The process is how you guys say it. Is so, everyone's like, process. I'm like, it's process, geez. Anyhow, but no, that the most important thing, like when I make work, there's a lot of steps, especially with material, that happen before I get to the finished product. And I don't care about the product. Once it's done, it's done. It's gone. It has to go somewhere, or it gets stuck in a closet somewhere. But yeah, it's just a different way of thinking and seeing and doing. Yeah.
I think, and sometimes the kind of lessons that you're learning, or even just the processes that you're learning, you don't quite realize, or later on it's hard to kind of articulate what it was, because the way you learned it is how you know it, and then it's not until it comes up against something that's different that you have to kind of learn to articulate how it's done. Meanwhile, you learned by watching and or doing it, or talking about it, but not in the same context. And so yeah, right out of the gate, it's something I would have to kind of think about and reach back into, think about the things that I've learned and try to piece together an answer. But yeah, there's not necessarily like a teaching that I can easily think back to that is applicable to every situation or question. Not that I think that's what you were asking, but yeah, sometimes it's the way we've learned things. It doesn't. You can learn something, but then it's another thing to teach that thing without kind of teaching it the way that you learned it, which is like by doing it and by watching. And so I think if there is an example, whether it is fishing practices or hunting practices, if there's an example that makes sense to you, then watch and learn, and that's where that's how you'll learn. So it's, rather than kind of trying to articulate that, find someone you can learn from and watch and learn and listen when there is somebody who has something to share or has some knowledge to give. Then listen to those people, and if there is an example of sustainable fishing, try and follow that. Or if you have Indigenous or Inuit artists who are saying, hey, this is going on and this is not sustainable and this needs to stop, then, support that person and listen to that person, because, that's an example and an opportunity to learn, and people are providing those examples. So find them, listen to them, and I don't think that I could.
Our Native people love Facebook, even though I don't really do it, but they do.
Yes.
Replace the CB or whatever, the radio.
Breaker 19. We have to break up this
Has
conversation.
anyone seen
Thank
Tommy?
you. Can I ask him now, Pugoya, thank you very much, and will you help me in thanking these two artists? Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald, and thank you, Sonya, and thank you, Couzyn, for tonight's discussion and for sharing insights into your respective practices with us. It's always a real treat to hear directly from curators and artists about their projects and the work they make, so your time and words are very much appreciated here. For more information about upcoming events and programs related to Arctic Amazon, please visit agns.ca. I hope all of you will return often to spend time with the works in this exhibition as it remains on view through until September 17th. At this time, I'd like to invite everybody to join us in the gallery space where the exhibition is. We'll go through the doors at the back of the theater here and down the ramp to the left. The artists and curators will be present and will happily answer any questions you have. Thank you.